Welcome to another episode of the Offset Podcast. This week, Robbie and I are going to be talking about something that just about anybody in post-production has experienced at one time or another, and that is burnout and fatigue. And how do you deal with it? How do you prevent it? And how do you recover from it? Stay tuned.
This episode is sponsored by our friends Flanders Scientific, who are leaders in color-accurate display solutions for professional video. Whether you're a colorist, editor, DIT, or broadcast engineer, Flanders Scientific has professional display solutions to meet your needs. Learn more at flandersscientific.com.
Welcome back, everyone. I'm Joey Deanna. With me is, of course, Robbie Carmen, and today we want to tackle a subject that I think anybody listening to this podcast that has worked in post-production is going to be familiar with and has dealt with at some point in their career, and that's burnout, overwork, that go mentality where it's just nonstop and you feel like, sometimes it's just the stress keeps piling up and, you get to a point where you're less effective. So we want to talk about kind of how that happens, why it happens, and some of the stuff that we do and you can do to avoid it and improve it.
Dude, it's a serious issue, I think, for our industry. I think, worst case, people burn out, talented people burn out enough that they leave the industry entirely because of the fact that it's just overworking them and literally killing them, right?
I've seen exactly that. I knew a junior editor one time, and I worked with her for a while, and we trained her at my old company, and
Yeah.
I honestly, she was one of the most talented people I've ever worked with, in terms of just raw talent of seeing a story and putting it together. And I think the industry just kind of worked her to death, and she ended up leaving and going to a completely different career path. And that was a big loss for the industry in my view.
Yeah, I think our industry, not there's no better or worse, this is just for the worse, is generally set up and generally operates on the idea that we are going to work people until they can work no more, and then we'll move on to the next person, right? A lot of times I think about, like, in landing jobs and and working with clients, it's sort of like, you can work your ass off for them, but sometimes there's like a point where, like, they just expect a miracle sometimes, right? Oh, like, sure, we'll give you 4 hours to try to finish this hour-long project or whatever it may be. And I think it is a pervasive thing, but where I want to start this conversation is kind of the why is it so pervasive? And I think that is largely, well, in part, I can't say largely. I think in part it's due to the fact that the people who are often calling the shots in our industry are not the same people who are actually pushing the buttons in the industry, right? So there's a certain disconnect a lot of times in many projects for managers not quite understanding the effort that's required to do any given task or any given job at any given time. So it might make sense to the manager or whoever's running the show to go, oh, well, they need 2 or 3 hours to do this, when in reality it's a full day of work, right? I think that's where it starts. There's a disconnect oftentimes between the idea of in budgeting for time and budgeting for effort, and there's a disconnect between what it actually takes. And that's where I see
and it's important to know, when you're writing checks and you're the one, holding the purse strings, not necessarily doing the work, and you recognize that time is money,
yeah,
there's going to be an inclination to reduce the amount of time. And that's not always a good thing.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that if you ask every operator, whether they be an editor, colorist, mixer, camera person, etc., they would always be willing, not always, but most of the time, be willing to sacrifice a little bit of actual pay and cost for more time to do something, right? I would rather have 10 hours instead of 6 hours to do something, even if it means I'm going from $400 an hour to $375 an hour, right? Like, I would love to have that more time to do my job right. And I think there's also a disconnect and we talked about this in our episode we did recently about the race to the bottom, shrinking budgets, right? Yeah, I get it. Money's going down, but time is also going down too for the same amount of work. And just is, it's epidemic in our industry that forces people who are like us and like others that we know, who always want to do a good job, who always want to put their best foot forward, to do so much effort to within the time and money that they have, that they end up just literally killing themselves and burning out because all these factors are against them, right? And I think that it's not something that can be solved like a light switch. I don't think it's any one single person can solve it, but being aware of where it's caused by, I think, is a play. The other thing I came to mind just a second ago, the other place I think where burnout, the reason that burnout happens, and I have to be careful with my words here, Joey, because I really truly don't want to offend people. It's not my intention, right? But I actually, and
Sometimes I do.
I'm gonna bring this home. I'm gonna make this personal because I see it with my own kids as well. And I think that every successive generation has always had this feeling. But we work in an industry where there is hard work, right? Just like a bricklayer works in an industry where there's heavy physical labor, or a woodworker has to do whatever. There are industries that are hard, right? There are industries that are more than. I sent you a funny meme the other day about the what was it, the worldwide global meeting industrial complex, right? There are industries that are more than just meetings nonstop 24 hours a day, right? Which in itself is probably hard too. But I don't want anybody to not understand me clearly that post-production is hard. Even if you have a lot of time, it still requires a lot of effort. And I mentioned my kids because one of the things, my kids are essentially teenagers, and I work with them or talk to them about a lot, is that there is a difference between feeling that you had a long day and you were worked and you were tired versus being burned out, right? There is a thing I think that is pervasive now with I just don't feel, it doesn't, I'm tired, it doesn't make me feel comfortable, I'm burned out, I need 3 weeks off, right? And there, it's, again, I'm not trying to make fun of everybody, but there's a fine line between getting people to understand that hard work is required versus killing yourself to do that work. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's very important to kind of specify here, because people will go to the opposite extreme. People will say, I only want to work 7 hours a day. I need to have a 2 hour lunch, and I expect the world to be handed to me.
Right.
That's
Right.
not going to work in any industry driven by finances, right? Uh, at the end of the day, hard work and success is what kind of separates the successful production, or sorry, separates the successful people from the less successful people. The people that put in more effort will go farther. But what's really important in my view is to be able to kind of manage your time, target where you're putting that effort in. You know, if you have a finite amount of effort available, you want to put it towards things that are going to be productive and move the project forward, not tread water on things that are going to get you burnt out. You know, if you spend the whole day doing tasks because of some kind of organizational reason or whatever that are just mentally exhausting you, and you feel like you hate these tasks and it's not working, and it's not moving the project forward at all.
Yeah.
You know, that happens a lot in some workflows, and that can really burn you out fast. For what benefit? What's the point?
Yeah, I think there's a certain attitude of, and again, not everybody has this, but I think there's a certain attitude, and I'm seeing it with my kids, that once it does get a little challenging, whether that be challenging in sort of, it's being a tedious thing, whether that gets challenging in the fact that you don't know how to solve the problem, because that's something that comes up in post-production all the time. Here's a problem. What do I do? I have no idea. And then three, anytime there's like maybe some negative pushback from decision makers and clients, I think there's like, well, it's getting a little hard, I just want to give up, right? And I think that's that's a different thing entirely than burnt out. Burned out happens to the people who do the extraordinary efforts, who do the entire process to try to make something happen and run up against a brick wall where almost it gives them almost, in some cases it does, gives them panic attacks to return to that task and return to that thing because it is so trying. I'm not talking about the people who get a little uncomfortable from a little bit of hard work. I'm talking about the people who are worked to the grindstone, the people that are at the office until 2 a.m. and back at it at 7 a.m. doing that 6 days a week, right? I'm talking
Yeah,
about
and
I'm talking about those people who are dumped on by everybody else in their facility in their office because they know how to do something when there's 12 other people that could be assisting or doing that job. I'm talking about the people who could benefit from workflow automations and working smarter and not harder. It's those kind of people that I think are prone to burnout.
yeah, and it's important to just kind of know there's a balance for this, and it's different for everyone. Everyone has a different tolerance of work-life balance and hours worked, effort put in versus reward coming to you as in terms of, billable hours and finances or, more or less time available. That's a balance that every individual has to figure out on their own. But I think some of the stuff that we can talk about is how do you best optimize for that balance, right? If you there's certain things and certain attitudes that you can take to these projects and to this industry that can make it so no matter what your ideal work-life balance is, you're closer to it because you're managing your time better and you're being more effective.
Let's talk about that first one that you just mentioned, time management, because I think that time management is a key component to that feeling of feeling stressed. It's a key component to eventual burnout that might exist. And I often audit people by asking them some probing questions about people who are feeling burned out and burned stressed. And it's like, okay, tell me about your day, right? And inevitably, in the description that they give, there is a lot of uh, sort of dead time that might feel busy, but it's not productive time, right? So you talk to people and you're like, okay, hey, maybe you should use time tracking software. There's some automatic tools out there to kind of get a baseline for you, right? And I've tried this myself because at times in my career, I've been like, man, am I just dilly-dallying? And I run a time tracker that, it's one of those tools that kind of like tracks what app you're in. And so for me, for you, we should be spending, most of our time in Resolve or, creative applications, right? And the couple times I've done this, I've been like, oh, look at that. I've been spending like 4.5 hours in a web browser. Oh, I've been on Facebook and Instagram. Like, and you don't really realize how throughout a day that time adds up. Because, let's put it in color correction terms. We have a show. Let's just say that show is 1,000 shots and we have, 2 days to do it. Do the math, whatever, it comes out to like a minute or less, per shot to get it done, right? And so if you think about you're spending 20 minutes over here, 30 minutes over there, texting, doing whatever, that's putting the pressure on you. Now that time has gone from a minute or so to shot. Now you got 40 seconds a shot, 30 seconds a shot, 20 seconds a shot. And next thing you know, you're woefully behind. And so I think one of the biggest ways of avoiding this feeling of burnout and feeling more accomplished is to really try to work on the self-discipline of focus, right?
Yeah.
And for me, I think I know I have to work on this harder than you have to work on it, because I think that once you have the type of personality, I can't think about anything else until task is accomplished, right? Me, I procrastinate as like a coping mechanism for the stress, right?
I was going to say the next thing is avoid procrastination, because once I have the biggest problem getting started.
Yeah.
Right. Like if I'm looking at a blank timeline of 1,000 shots,
yeah,
I'm probably going to look at the internet for a while before I hit that first shot. And I'm probably going to do that longer than I should. And I might sit on the couch and drink my coffee a little too long before I get going. Once I get going, I'll be in the zone. I'll have the music going. I'll be like shot, 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 shot. And and then I have to remind myself to take breaks, right? Which is something we should talk about as well. But like, yeah, procrastination is like a snowball effect, right?
It is.
If you wait too long to get something started, like you said, your time per shot goes way down. So now you're stressed, now you're rushing, you're trying to catch up constantly, and all of that adds up and adds up and adds up. So 1 hour of procrastination can end up being 3 hours of extra work, and that's going to contribute to burnout much more than
Because, yeah,
just
you're
getting
because you're
started an hour
backloading.
earlier.
Totally. And I think I often experience that getting started thing too, but I think, unlike you, where once you get into it, you're kind of laser focused. I'm like, what's that kids movie where it's like squirrel? I'm like that,
Yeah.
man. I'm like, oh, I got a text message and I'm distracted for the next 45 minutes. Or like, I'm like, oh, cool, this thing just dropped for Home Assistant. Let me spend the next hour and a half like programming something in a Home Assistant when I have a show sitting in front of me, right?
So that is also an essential, I think, time management technique that people don't really focus on enough, which is avoiding multitasking. Everybody multitasks a little bit, but in most cases, multitasking is unnecessary and intellectually taxing when you're trying to get
and
things done.
it's actually a farce, right? You can shift between tasks, but you can't your brain doesn't work in the way that you can actually do multiple tasks at the same time. Like, you call it
Yeah.
multitasking, right? You say I'm multitasking, but what you're really doing is shifting quickly from one
Yeah, you're
area of focus.
switching quickly.
You're switching quickly, right? So I think that's true. From an
But for
actual
every task switch, right, there's adaptation. There is, I'm focused on this.
Yep.
Oh, I got to reply to this email. Let me read the email, think about it.
Now you're in email mode.
Okay.
Right.
Oh, and then another email just came in. Okay, now I got to get back to grading. All right, where was I? I got to go back a few shots, see my context. So every time you do a major switch of task during the day,
There's
you're
adaptation period.
adding a kind of in and out transition that's just adding to the total amount of effort. And not everything has to be addressed immediately. That's another time management thing that I think we all lose track of, because we have these
Okay.
stupid robots that beep at us, and we just, every email comes in like, oh, I got to respond to this right now. You almost always don't have to, and I'm so guilty of this.
Yeah,
but
man.
sometimes you got to like let something sit for a while so you can focus.
So let's talk about those things, because those are all really good things and things that are on my list too. I have like 3 or 4, maybe 5 super straightforward ways that I combat this when it's really getting bad, right? And I've gotten better over the years, because I used to make excuses for like, oh, it's all part of the process, and telling myself stories. Now I realize that it's just like, I got to do these things to help myself. So number 1, utilize do not disturb type stuff. I think that is, I mean, I'm like squirrel, right? So the second I get a ding ding ding, and it's really bad with like social media stuff, Facebook and Instagram and Discord and Slack, whatever. Like, utilizing some of that stuff to have your own time is good. Related to that, I often find myself, it's about like a level of time for dedication, right? So I'm not, this is going to sound totally stupid, but I really do this. I will set a timer, or I will tell like Alexa or Google or whatever. I'll be like, set a timer for X amount of time, for like 90 minutes, right? And I try to make it through that entire 90-minute block by not getting distracted. It almost becomes like a little contest with myself. Okay,
Yeah.
like, I'm going to go 90 minutes without any other distractions and focus. And it's amazing that where I'm like, oh my God, look at what I just got done in 90 minutes of focus, rather than 90 minutes of going back and forth between different computers, social media, phone, whatever. Like, if I just set a reasonable block of time to go focus, okay, now I get 10 minutes off to go, screw around with, the internet or whatever. That's another one. Third, at my worst, I have had to disconnect the internet from my computers momentarily, right? I know that you're a big fan of the kind of like total air gapped workstation, and I think one of the benefits of the air gapped workstation is you got no internet, right? I mean, like,
Yeah, I mean, honestly, all my internet's on a sys station. So if
Right.
I need to go to the internet, I need
You
to
have to make a conscious
physically
choice.
move in my
Yes.
chair slightly. And that does help.
Yeah.
Besides all the technical reasons to do that.
Yeah, totally. I think that's a big one. And then I think the other way that I think about this particular one in time management is that especially when it comes, I think it's easier for certain types of tasks, but for like an initial pass on color grading, which I think is arguably the most important part of the process for us, right? Where I'm just trying to get from the first shot to the last shot. I often break down, I create metrics for myself that I'm like,
Yeah.
okay, in day number 1, I have to hit 400 shots or whatever the number is, right? and I look at my time and go, well, it's already 2 o'clock. I am only at shot number 238. I need to start hustling or whatever. And I think that, kind of setting tackable, approachable, or, goals that you can tackle in manageable blocks is another really good way of looking at it. Be like, okay, yeah, I can maybe screw around and stuff, but I have to accomplish this today, and giving yourself some perspective on what you have to accomplish as a goal for the day is going to make it seem a little bit more approachable and make you feel accomplished, honestly, when you get to that point.
Yeah, and if you look at specifically color grading, right? We talk about working in passes all the time. Think of it as a sculpture. You take off the big pieces first, and then you whittle it down and down
Yeah.
and down and down.
Yeah.
If you're being more mindful of your time and your lack of distractions or your distractions, and kind of a good idea of what pace you're working at, you might look at how you're doing your first pass and say, I need to do less per shot to get through this faster so I can organize my time better. It's one of those things to kind of think, you don't want to get hyper focused on one particular shot and start wasting time when you need to be moving the project forward. Because again, just like procrastinating, all that's going to do is going to push everything else down the line to be more added up effort.
Agreed. I also find myself, when I'm at my worst with this procrastination and lack of time management, because everything, as you have discussed, gets pushed to the back end. I often find that back end happens at times that are not my optimal time. So in other words, if I'm
Yeah.
screwing around all day, the next thing you know is that I got all this work to do in the evening when I'm maybe not at my most focused, best self anyway, right? So I think another way of kind of trying to avoid some of this burnout and some of that stress is to figure out what your optimal hours are and stick to those hours in a repeatable way, right? So for
Yeah.
me, I know that in the morning when I first get up, like I'm just kind of a zombie, right? I need like a good hour to 90 minutes to check email, surf the internet, have some coffee, kind of wake up, get ready to start it. Whereas somebody like my wife, 7 a.m., man, she is on. And at 3 p.m., she's done. 4 p.m., she's
Yeah.
done, right? So I think whatever that hour range is, I think it's important to figure that out for you, because if you're forcing yourself into time blocks that you're not the most efficient and you're not the most focused, it is wasted time, right? So if you're finding yourself screwing around all day only to work at night, maybe you need to shift your day a little bit to be like, okay, well, I'm going to be more focused on the night, and not try to force things in and get things half-assed. Block your day out that way.
Yeah, and I think it's really, really, really important, especially in this world now where, I work from home, you work from home. My
Mhm.
commute is walking down the
That's the
stairs.
case, right?
I think it's really important to maintain consistency, even when you're really busy and when you're not busy. So I'm down here in the office at 9 in the morning every day, whether or not I have something immediately to do at 9 in the morning or not. I am up, I'm showered, I've got my coffee, and I'm at least here.
Yep.
I'm not always busy enough that I need to just jump on the box immediately and start going shot, 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 shot. But I'm awake, I'm here. I'm not like, oh, I don't have a lot of work to do today, so I'm going to sleep in
Well,
and just relax.
diving one more level into that, though, I think that what I have determined for myself is that I really like, we're recording this right now, it's 1:50 p.m. I find that from like about noon, 1 o'clock until about 8 or 9 o'clock is kind of my peak time, right? So realizing that I'm not sleeping in until 1 o'clock. Well, I should say most days I'm not sleeping until 1 o'clock. So what I've realized about myself is kind of separating different tasks for different times of the day. So where like
Mhm.
as I mentioned, where I'm a little bit of a zombie, just want to sit and look at my iPad or whatever that first part of the day. It's not that I can't do work during that time period, like if you'll say from 11 to 1. It's just that I know that that time period is for a certain type of work. So that's when I'm
Yeah,
doing
that's the
invoice.
brain dead work. That's
Right. That's what
replying
I'm
to
doing.
emails, doing invoices,
Right.
doing management.
Invoices, emails, that kind of stuff, and not trying to force myself to focus in time that I'm just going to be wasted if I try to do a mind heavy focus task in a period of time where I'm not ready for that. And so I think that, and there are far more knowledgeable people about this, and there's a lot of studies going on as we, went through COVID and people started more work from home. A lot of efficiency studies going on where people are most effective and all that kind of stuff. But I think that if you kind of break it down how you work best and try to tailor your schedule and your design of that to how you work best, you'll find yourself being actually far more efficient, less prone to burnout, less stressed. And I think in general, the American work week anyway, and it's probably similar in other parts of the world, but here in the States is just kind of a mess, right? This whole 9 to 5 kind of thing does not recognize that a lot of people don't work that way, right? And a lot of people are not optimized to work that way. And so what I would tend to say to people is figure that out and see what the most efficient part of your day is. So the other problem that is related to what I just said is, I think you'll agree with this, that we tend to work in an industry where not everybody, but there are a lot of obsessive compulsive detail oriented people, right? And I
I have
have
no idea what
found,
you're talking about.
right, that doesn't sound familiar at all. um I have struggled over the years with kind of the bring it home, even though I'm working from home, but mentally, the bring it home, live with something outside of the working day kind of thing that initiates a tremendous amount of stress. I'll give you an example. We're working on a project right now that's a little messy, has a lot of bajillion different deliverables and all that kind of stuff. And I'm sitting on the couch last night, and it's like, I don't know, maybe like 11:15. I'm watching watching the news, and this idea just pops in my head of like, man, I should, you know what? I think I messed up that slate. I should go downstairs and like fix that slate and re-upload the file, right? And this goes to what you said, something can always kind of wait. Um, I have, and I do that occasionally, and last night was a bad example, but I have tried to force myself into this attitude of it doesn't always have to be fixed immediately, right? And
Yes.
that nobody at 11 o'clock at night is going, hey, Rob, you need to fix this. They might say something the next morning at 8 o'clock in the morning or 9 o'clock in the morning, but they're not saying for it right now. And so I think having some sort of boundaries of what your work day is and bringing kind of work home with you is also a way of battling this, right? Like once you leave, whether even if that computer's at home, once you leave that computer desk, turn it off as much as you possible. And the way that only way that I've been able to do that recently is by also not looking at email after hours because
Yeah.
because
I
somebody
was
will,
going to say the one thing that everybody that works in post production ever,
yeah.
if I could say one possible piece of mental health advice to give you, is turn off Frame.io notifications because they come in tiny little bits,
Yeah.
tiny little spurts. So if someone's watching something and they're just writing notes casually, you're going to feel like, oh my God, I'm getting picked apart because it's email, 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 email. Turn off
So
Frame.io
hold on. This is a
notifications.
funny little inside baseball story for our audience that we had hooked up our Frame.io notifications to Slack, and
Also mute Slack.
I I was like, I was messaging Joey, be like, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. And it was because every single time somebody commented on anything, we were getting these dings, right? Ding, 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 ding. And you're absolutely right, man. Like managing that, your notification, I just generally say managing your notifications can also help largely with that feeling of being stressed and overwhelmed and burnout because you know what?
And specifically with
You have this great phrase. I'm sorry I cut you off, but you have this great phrase that I've really tried to internalize and that I really try to tell other people. I'm going to say it right now. And this is the best phrase that you say. That's a tomorrow problem, right? Now, on the surface of it, a tomorrow problem sounds like you might be procrastinating. That's not when you personally use that phrase.
No.
You use that phrase at a moment when you know that you are going to be operating suboptimally with the least amount of efficiency, and at a time of day where your immediate response to it or your immediate action on it doesn't really affect the outcome one way or another, right? So it's your method, which I've tried to adopt, of reducing the mental overhead and reducing that mental load by going, nope, there is no good reason that this has to happen immediately. I don't have to drop everything and run. This can happen tomorrow morning. Now, you might prioritize it as the first thing for tomorrow morning that you do, but you're not at 10:30 or 11 o'clock going to leave your family, get out of bed, walk off the couch or whatever, and go do that thing, which is something I've learned from you and I greatly admire.
Yeah, and a few things about that. Let's take the Frame.io example. This legitimately happened to us semi recently. It
Yeah.
was one of those things where Robbie was on a project. He was getting a pile of Frame.io notifications, and he would look at them like tangentially and be like, "Oh no, they're crazy. They're tearing up the whole project, whatever." And I'm like, "Nope, turn it all off. Wait until you can look at all the notes in context as a
Right.
whole."
Right. Yeah.
Because if you go in right now and start addressing these notes one by one, you're tired. You're probably going to look at it again tomorrow and just have to redo the work anyway. And two, it's probably not nearly as bad as the amount of emails makes it sound. And then sure enough, like the next day, you look at the pile of notes and every other note is, oh, that shot looks really good. Then a note of like, can we take out a tiny bit of blue here? And then another two notes of, oh, I love this scene. So I mean, granted, not all projects happen like that, but sometimes what looks like a mountainous pile of stuff at the end of the day with fresh eyes is much, much, much more approachable. So yeah, I don't consider that procrastination. Like we both said, I think procrastination is the enemy of productivity. But there's a difference between procrastination and optimization, right? I get this all the time too. Like I have done, I like to work on cars and motorcycles, right?
Right. Right.
I have spent hours and hours and hours underneath of a car working on something really, really difficult and just banging my head up against the wall and nothing's working. I can't get that one bolt out. I can't do whatever. And I will just walk away. The next day, it's a 2-second job.
No, those are all great points, man. And I just think that no matter how you cut it, realizing when is a good time for you, minimizing the distractions, and working in blocks that are you can tackle in an easy way to make you feel like you're making progress is a good thing. And I think at the end of the day, with that kind of general idea of time management, you're right. It's going to be a little different for everybody, but I think that you can minimize the feeling of being overwhelmed by breaking things down into smaller tasks and blocks, right?
Mm-hmm.
Whether that's a time block, whether it's a task block, or whatever it is, anybody is going to be intimidated about a feature film with 400 deliverables, right? That's gonna scare anybody, right? But if you break it down into, nope, I got through the first act in the time frame that I said I was gonna get in the first act, check it off the list, accomplished. You start looking at it much more as a lot of checks on the checklist rather than a lot of unchecked things, right? And that really can kind of build your mental space there. Now, shift gears here for a second because I think that with time management is a way to fight this. But I think that if you're already kind of in that zone of everything is doomsday, everything sucks, I'm burnt out, or whatever, it can be hard to shift the mental gears out of that, right? I'll give you a case in point. Years ago, and I'm not picking on you because I think it's one of the only times where I ever felt you said this so succinctly, and it was amazing. You had been in a zone where you were doing nothing but spots, and specifically cut down after cut down after cut down of spots, right? It was like Tuesday, Thursday, 5 p.m., 6 p.m., right? And you were just feeling like completely overwhelmed with just God, I'm just a machine. I just whatever. I spit out widgets every day, right? And I think it's really easy for all of us to get into that zone where we feel like we're working on the same kind of project. I often feel that like I get really kind of in my zone with the same sort of tool set, the same sort of approach. It's like I often joke like sometimes I could break things down. It's like lift gamma gain, saturation, next shot. Lift gamma gain, saturation, next shot, right? So to me, one of the one of the ways of kind of breaking that, if you are feeling already burnt out, is to expand your horizons a little bit, right? In terms of, kind of the genres that you're working on. So if you are doing a lot of long form, try some short form, right? Opposite, if you're doing a lot of short form, try some long form. For me, a lot of the revelation, often that feeling comes trying new workflows too, where like new tools, new DCTL, new OFX, new color management pipeline, whatever. Doing things differently than the way that I have been doing them kind of gives me a mental break sometimes and makes me feel like battle the repetitivity of things and feel like, oh, now I have a new way of doing something. This is cool. And I just found that to kind of be a way of becoming engaged again with what I'm doing by working on something new. Now, at the same time, can be a little scary. You got to manage that. Like, I've never worked on this type of project, or I've never used this kind of tool, but I think it can help with that kind of thing.
Yeah, and I also think that that goes into something I firmly believe in, and that is, while we've talked about being efficient with our time,
Yeah.
during the day, you do need to walk away a little bit.
Hmm.
Whether that is, oh, I am going to try a new technique on something, or I've been meaning to experiment with something unrelated to this project, or I'm a big advocate of getting out of the office to actually go eat lunch, hopefully outside or somewhere. You know, it's not a huge time sink to do that, but it makes your overall day so much better, at least in my case, that just getting out of the office once or twice during the day, whether it's to get a coffee, get lunch, and you do it at efficient times, right? So we talked about,
Right. You just delivered 20,
setting
you just
benchmarks for
delivered,
yourself.
you delivered 20 files, you're waiting for feedback. Great time to go out.
Yeah, I got through Act One. Great. I'm gonna go get a cup of coffee,
Yeah.
come back,
Yeah.
start fresh on Act Two.
Yeah. Totally.
That's one of those time management things that I really believe in and helps me a lot.
Yeah, and I think related to the idea of trying different genres, different tools, I also think that like one of the ways to kind of build that spark in a lot of people too, I would say it kind of like vertically integrate yourself into the process a little bit more, right? And you've seen this a lot with the classic term for this is the predator, right? The editor who's also the producer, right? Who's now taking over roles. I think there's a lot of leeway in post production to do other parts of the job if you want. Now, of course, that can come with dangers of doing too much and biting off more than you can chew. But I have often found that when I'm feeling a little burned out, a little stressed about where the workflow, engaging slightly different. And that could be, with our workflow, that could be like, Joey, I'm feeling burnt out. Can you handle the button pushing on this? I'll take over the admin or whatever, right? Or it might be something where I'm like, dude, you do the color, I'll do all the online. You say this to me all the time. I'll do all the online, Rob, you do the color. Like it kind of breaks you out of the mold of what you normally
Yeah,
do.
I love doing online editing, and because that's kind of my background. And every so often too, when we get into the stuff that's like right on the edge of what the colorist is doing,
Yep.
advanced blurs, composites, stuff like that, being able to just be like, I'm going to focus on this for a little bit because it's an interesting challenge. That can really get you back into your zone.
Well, this podcast is a great example of something like this for us, right? Where, yeah, we like to blab about XYZ all the time and share it with the world, but this is also a creative, a creationary outlet for us
Oh
to
yeah.
walk away from the tedious tasks that we have to accomplish. Like when we're done with this recording, we're both going back to pushing buttons and resolve, but this gives us that hour or two of time away from that to kind of create things. And so I think that, another way of saying that kind of vertically can integrate is like maybe find a side hustle for you, right? Like I am constantly amazed by how many people are really good at a lot of things, but only think that they're good at one, right?
Yeah.
And so, maybe you're an editor or maybe you're a colorist. Hey, maybe try your hand at doing some tutorials. Maybe try your hand at doing some speaking. Maybe try your hand at whatever, like something that is tangentially related to what you do, but you're still good at, is a great way. Music has always been something like that for me, right? Where it's like it's a creative outlet that I feel like I'm still making, I'm still creating, I'm still using my artistry, but it's just enough separated from what I do as my core competency day to day that it feels different enough to kind of break that mental, the synapses that are going, don't do this anymore, kind of thing, right? So it's a good way to handle it as well.
Yeah, for me, I've got 1,000 of them. Not all of them make money, but some of
That's
them
true.
cost money.
Well, they
But
don't have to make money, right? I mean, I don't think well, a side hustle I think implies it's like it's a money earning kind of thing. And certainly money is a motivator for a lot of us in terms of whether we do something or not do something. But I think there's also doing side stuff just for the passion of it to break the yin and yang aspect of it, right? Doing something that is not the same thing that you're doing every day. And I've always
yeah,
looked at it to me like, over the past 25 years, there's the creative work, there's training work, there's speaking work, and these kings all kind of feed one another, and it
yeah.
gives me the flexibility of any certain day where I'm like, man, I'm really not feeling sitting at the desk all day doing grading work. I can work on some tutorials, right? Or whatever. It gives me a way out to still be moving the ball forward, still be making some money, but working on something that's a little different too, which is interesting.
Yeah, and that all comes back to, optimizing your use of time as opposed to just, you know, playing whack-a-mole with your time, right? I need to do
Yep.
this, I need to do this, I need to do this. Take it in as it comes, right? If you sit down and think about how to optimize your time, you'll do better across the board. And one thing I think that's really important that not a lot of people talk about when this subject comes up, right? Because it's very easy to say you need to have a work-life balance. If you don't, it's the company's fault and they're bad.
Yeah.
And, you need to, again, everybody has a different ideal work-life balance, and that has consequences both on their life and their work.
Yep.
But also, if you can optimize your time to avoid burnout, like we've been talking about, when the time comes up where a project is a absolute mess and you need to hunker down and work the 12-hour days, 14-hour days,
Because that's gonna
work the
happen.
weekends,
It's gonna happen.
completely push to your limit, you're ready to do that because you're not burnt out by your day to day and you can still be the hero for your clients.
So the Olympics just happened this past month. I know you're not a big sports Olympics guy, but there was something that hit me in the Olympics that I think is relevant to this discussion. I was watching the sprinters, right, and in the heats before, like as they're getting, going from quarterfinals, semifinals, finals. You often see these elite athletes like they'll pull up a little bit at the end of the race, right, to kind of conserve some energy. And that's exactly kind of what you're saying or hinting at, right? Is that
Yeah.
like if you go full on, full out all the time, you're just inviting that you're not going to have your best when push comes to shove when you really need it, right? So realizing a little bit too of like, I've said this before in other ways, like not everything is art. Sometimes you just got to do the project and move on, not let it consume you. Is the same thing as that sprinter, right? There are certain projects where it's just like, no, I'll do this project, I'll do it to the best of my ability, I'll do a good job, but you don't necessarily, for a lot of reasons, budget, schedule, whatever, you're not necessarily having to do that full on extra gear, if you will, in car terms, right? And I think that's a really good point that you make, because there are projects that you're going to want to, for whatever reason, push it extra far. Maybe it's a project, a passion project, or a friend of yours that you love. Maybe it's something that's really paying a lot of money, and so you want to do, what, I don't know. There's a lot of things that could do it, but having some reserve, I think, is
Yeah.
a really important part of this. And to that other end, the flip side of that same coin, Joey, is that I do want to stress that no matter, and I said this at the top of the episode, we do work in a hard industry,
Yeah.
and there are people that are going to push you. And I think one of the other things, the last thing I have to discuss today, is dealing with the personalities that contribute to stress and to burnout, right? When I first graduated college, I went to go work at a very large network I lasted about a week and a half, to be honest with you. And there was a manager who will go nameless, who's infamous in the DC TV world, who day number one, like I had literally gotten my key card and was like getting the tour of the facility, started yelling at me. I can't even remember what it was, like something, just yelling, right? And our industry, unfortunately, is full of a lot of those personalities, right? People who think that by belittling you, by yelling at you, whatever, like they're gonna get there. It's like they think they're like football coaches, right? They watched a movie sometime where they saw like some guy giving a motivational speech by yelling at somebody. there are a lot of people who just break down to that kind of thing, right? And just close off and won't give their best effort. And I think that all of us can try our best to kind of to identify and eliminate a lot of that behavior in our industry, because at the end of the day, we're making movies, we're making TV. Like we've said this before, it's not open heart surgery. Nobody's
Yeah,
going to
nobody
die.
dies.
Nobody's going to die from anything like that. And the people who treat it like that are a little bit toxic. They contribute to a lot of people, myself included, sometimes feeling overwhelmed and that kind of stuff. And I just don't think there's a place for that in our industry. I think that
No, but I
more
mean, the
times than
best
not,
thing you can do to slow that down and to stop it from happening is to not do it yourself. You know, when
yeah,
you're in a position where you're managing other people or you're interacting as the leader of a project, you know, just take that into effect and you know, don't do that kind of bad management yourself, and that will set the example. But you can't all another thing to really remember is you can't always control what other people do or how they act, but you can control if you really internalize it and, you know, take it as a slight.
yeah,
Some people are just jerks.
yeah, and sometimes I often think about this, and you've said this to me a lot. My wife has said this to me a lot. Other people I care for a lot have said this to me. Is that sometimes you just got to give people the benefit of the doubt, right? Like somebody might be barking at you because you know what, whatever they had that morning they had an argument with their partner, their spouse or whatever, and they left the house and they're in a really crappy mood, and now you're just getting the brunt of it, right? Sometimes you just kind of have to let it roll off of the other shoulder. If it's a repetitive thing, that's different. Like if it's happening time and time and time again. But sometimes people just have bad days. And sometimes you just shouldn't internalize that kind of stuff. And I think the same thing, goes for uh feedback, comments on email, that kind of stuff. You just have to remind yourself sometimes, if you're feeling edgy and feeling like you're right on that case of burnout, whatever, is that sometimes people don't really mean what your interpretation of what they said is not really what they meant. Tone was not implied, all of those kind of things.
Yeah, and it's funny because you know, we've all been that person, I think, at one point or another in our career. And we'd like to think that it hasn't happened. But if you're self aware at all, you can probably look back at the times and say, hey, I was out of line here. I remember I was one coworker I was working with for one particular week that he started this week. And I'm still very good friends with him, and he's a very talented guy, and we get along great. But he thought I was the absolute worst because he started the week I came back from my son being born. So his like first day was my first day back at work with my first infant child and hadn't slept in 2 weeks. And oh yeah, by the way, I decided to quit smoking cold turkey the day David was born. So yeah,
You are a delight.
I was not a delight. And I'm glad eventually I kind of evolved out of that, but like a little bit of self-awareness can go a long way to
Well,
fixing
I think
those
I think
things.
that I think that goes both ways too. I think that I have said to clients, and I've said to you personally sometimes, where I've gone off the deep end and I've been like really like upset about something or whatever. Again, slept on it, a little distance from the actual issue. And I think it's while it's important for the person who's, who might be, that manager I talked about earlier yelling at people. I think it's just as important that if you make a reactionary kind of thing, or you get upset about it, that you do that same level of apology, or stepping it back to and go, hey, you know what, guys, sorry, yesterday I just didn't have a lot of sleep, my family, whatever the issue is, I'm sorry for that. I'll try not to make that happen again. Goes a long way from just assuming that everybody just assumed that you had a bad day, right? Like just actual verbalizing that sometimes can go a long way, because everybody's been there, right? Like everybody's had problems at home or issues that, whatever. Saying that sometimes goes a long way. So
Yeah,
I don't know, man.
and
I
you
think
know, you got to make sure you're not always right about everything forever, right? You got to be able to kind of move your brain a little bit, and because if you hold on to the stressors that happen day to day, oh, this project didn't go how I wanted, and I was really upset about it, and I'm gonna be, you know, butthurt about that forever. All you're doing, like we've talked about basically for this entire episode, is you're stacking it up, and it's gonna add up at the end when you don't want it to.
We create a lot of stress for us. And I think the people that I admire most in this industry look at things as they come to them. This is a problem I have to tackle now. They're not looking 30 steps ahead at the potential problems. They're not projecting out of what the problems may or may not be. They're not telling stories to themselves about all the disasters that may happen. And I think that as an industry and operators, we tend to do that a lot. We go, what if, what if, what if, what if, instead of just tackling the problems as they're right in front of us. And I think that being kind of present and just tackling the things that are right there goes a long way to managing that stress too.
Yeah. So like last thing I'm going to say is like we've kind of touched on, if I could summarize my thoughts on the entire like ecosystem of issues here, it is that yes, working in post-production is hard.
Yeah.
It's going to take a lot of effort. The people that do put in the effort are the ones that are successful.
Cool.
And sometimes you do need to push, right? You do need to buckle down and go the extra mile and really kick ass on a project.
Yeah.
And the only way to really make that happen is if you can manage your time and manage your emotions and how you work with things like procrastination and time management and dealing with burnout. You need to actively prevent those problems from getting worse and worse and worse. So when the time comes where you really need to be on your game, you're ready. And everything we talked about makes a difference, but thinking consistent. Like we talked about consistency with hours, consistency with techniques, consistency with how you deal with things. I think consistency is a very big driver in how you can kind of achieve the work-life balance that you want to have.
And last thing I'll say is just finding a confidant that you can talk about with this stuff too, right? That somebody like, it's funny because my wife, Catherine, makes fun of me sometimes because I sometimes share more about the stressors in my life with you than I do with her, right? And I've always been like, well, it's not like I'm not trying to like cut you out of my emotional food chain here. It's just more of like, if I explain why something drives me crazy, that's a super technical thing. God, these people always deliver mats that are named this way or whatever. Like, she's going to go, that's stressful. Whereas you might go, oh, that's such a pain in the butt, right? So it doesn't matter who it is really. And maybe you have multiple people, but finding, I think, a confidant that you can describe some of these things to is important because there is some level of stress relief through solidarity too, where people who are like, oh yeah, I get it. I understand what you're going through and I understand that pain. Like the, kind of the difference between empathy and like sympathizing, right? Like, somebody in the trenches can really get it and really go, I sympathize, man. I've been right there before with you and understand that problem. Whereas somebody maybe not in the chain goes, they can empathize, but they might not really get it. And so, finding that person is important too. So good stuff, man. Well, hopefully at the end of this show, you're feeling a little more relaxed, a little more ways to manage this stress of feeling, burned out or whatever. If you do feel like you're getting burned out, I'm going to echo what Joey said earlier too. Downtime is a good thing. I have found that time, space can kind of cure a lot of problems, and also sometimes, there are situations that are untenable. If you find yourself in a situation that is completely untenable and you've tried to do everything within your power to fix and make work, sometimes it's just not worth it. Your mental health, your physical health, all those things are, trust me, are worth a lot more than, making a TV show. And so, deal with these things as they come. Be conscious in your approach, be conscious in your management of time and emotions and that kind of stuff. And hopefully it will help you feel a little less stressed. So good stuff. As a reminder, everybody, you can check out this and all of our episodes on YouTube. Just search for The Offset Podcast. You can also find us on YouTube by using our handle, The Offset Pod. And if you're on social media platforms like Facebook and Instagram, you can do the same thing. You can search for The Offset Podcast. We're present on those platforms. And lastly, a lot of people don't realize we do have a website for the show. It's just offsetpodcast.com. And on that page, we have a submission button. So if you have an idea for a show that you'd like, a topic that you'd like to see us cover, feel free to use that. It comes right to us and we'll consider it for a future show. As always, thanks to our editor Stella for helping put the show together. Big thanks to our pals at Flanders Scientific for being a sponsor of the show. And thank you to you guys for checking out another episode of the Offset Podcast. Remember, wherever you find the show, please subscribe and like. So I'm Robbie Carmen for the Offset Podcast.
And I'm Joey Deanna. Thanks for watching.